Okay. Welcome everybody to this webinar being put on by the Center for Jewish Civilization at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. My name is Jonathan Lincoln. For those that don't know me, I'm the director of the Center for Jewish Civilization. I'm particularly delighted today to welcome two very distinguished guests to discuss and help us better understand this rapidly shifting political and security dynamics concerning Israel and the broader Middle East. There is obviously a lot to talk about, so hopefully we can scratch the surface and dig down a little bit deeper as we go along. So I'd like to welcome first Ksenia Svetlova. Ksenia is the executive director of ROPES, the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics, and Security, and a former member of the Israeli Knesset. She's covered the Middle East as a journalist for many years, more than 15 years on Israeli television, at Israeli Channel 9, has written for the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, Haaretz, BBC Russian, and other international media outlets. She focuses on issues related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Israeli-Arab relations, Russian influence in the Middle East, as well as regional and international relations of the Middle East. And I'm also pleased to say that Ksenia is part of our center's vast network of interlocutors in Israel, and some of the faculty and myself had the opportunity to meet her on a visit last year. I'd also like to welcome our other panelists today, Ambassador Hesham Youssef. Ambassador Youssef is currently Senior Fellow with the European Institute of Peace, but he has a long and really distinguished career since 1985 as a diplomat with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, an Assistant Secretary General at the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, senior official at the Arab League, advising a number of secretaries general, including some of the more legendary Secretary General Amr Moussa, Nabil al-Arabi. In all of these postings, of course, he's engaged extensively in conflict resolution in the Middle East, particularly the Arab-Israeli conflict, Iraqi reconciliation, and the situation in Sudan. So I think you will understand that this is an incredible treat, really, for all of us to have such knowledgeable and experienced guests today. If okay, I'd like to engage both in conversation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to Q&A to the audience. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. And of course, I'll do my best to ensure that we get as many of the questions from our online audience as possible to our panelists. Of course, we're all watching the situation in Gaza, as well as this U.S. effort, sort of unprecedented U.S. effort to bolster ceasefire that remains more or less in effect, but amidst ongoing violence and concerns, as well as this effort to create a path towards reconstruction. So many questions, of course, about the Board of Peace, possible international force on the ground, as well as I would argue serious obstacles and multiple spoilers on the ground. But before we get to the specifics of Gaza in particular, and a number of the other issues, of course, on the agenda, and how this is all being viewed in the region, maybe I can ask each of you to give us sort of a general but brief sort of 5 to 10 minute overview of really what you see as the key changes of the past 2.5 years since October 7th, the outbreak of the war, how these events have shaped the political and strategic environment that we're now witnessing develop in the region. So I'll start, please, Hesham, Ambassador Youssef, if I can ask you to start.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to join in this webinar. You asked about how things have evolved in the last 2.5 years. The changes have been extremely significant, and this applies to the last few years and in the last year in particular under President Trump, where there has been significant strategic shift. I'll start with a few general observations, then I'll go into a few of the conflicts that we are following in the region, and of course Gaza amongst them. The first point is the level of unpredictability that we are facing in the world of today. And this is, unprecedented is a big word, but I think it's unparalleled in recent history. We have no idea what's going to happen with Iran. And the differences can be differences between a very widespread regional war to narrow strike. So this kind of thing. We have no idea how the situation would evolve. Also on issues at the international level, whether it's Ukraine, Greenland, and so on. So the level of unpredictability is an important factor in relation to how things are evolving. The second is we're also dealing with a situation whereby we have a lack of leadership, both at the regional level and at the international level. And this has a huge impact also on the situation in the region and at the international level, in particular when we come to talk about the rule-based international order that is being dismantled and what will replace it and so on. So this is another dimension. A third dimension in relation to the region is that the vast majority of countries in the region are hedging in relation to the situation between the United States, China, and Russia. And this, I think, will continue for some time to come. And another point is in relation to the fact that in order to resolve some of the conflicts in the region, you need to have extensive political capital. And there are no countries and no leaders in the world that has this level of extensive capital. Therefore, they are not willing to spend the political capital that they have in resolving conflicts. And therefore, they tend to see how they can transform these conflicts into low-intensity conflicts so that they are not grabbing the headline and so they don't have to take extensive or intensive decisions that may cause all kinds of difficulties because of balances in their own countries and regions. And this happened in Gaza as well. A number of countries that recognize Palestine because it's a political step that doesn't cost that much, and it gives an indication that they have undertaken a step that they think is important. All this leads to the situation whereby in the region we are working as firefighters. So we are not resolving conflicts. We are trying to see how they can be minimized as much as possible. Now, coming to Gaza, you mentioned the ceasefire. Well, it's not really a ceasefire. You can't have a ceasefire when all this death and casualties are taking place. Of course, Hamas was severely degraded militarily, but it wasn't totally eliminated politically, at least. The situation in Israel, I think Ksenia will be speaking about this mainly, but I think that the deterrence of Israel was both reinforced because of the successes that they have achieved operationally, but also became questionable on a strategic level. As for relations with the region, the relations between Israel and both Egypt and Jordan is at its worst since signing the two peace agreements between the two countries. And of course, normalization has been taking, a dramatic blow. And the expectations that the US and Israel had that there would be a long line of countries who are willing to normalize did not materialize and will probably not materialize in the near future. And ironically, the two-state solution that everybody thought was dead returned to the scene in some way, in one way or another, whether it's through the recognitions that I mentioned or through the effort that was done jointly in the General Assembly between France and Saudi Arabia, trying to see what can be done in relation to the peace process and the prospects of peace. And despite all this gloomy picture, and I'll come to Syria and Lebanon, but there is an opportunity in as far as Israel is concerned with Syria and Lebanon, and we can go into details about that in our discussion. In relation to Iran, this is, of course, one of the major changes that took place in the last few years, with significant attacks by the United States, which is, major. President Trump indicated that he obliterated the nuclear program of Iran, but then now we're talking about having another attack on Iran. Initially, the argument was because the people who are demonstrating are dying and so on, and help is on the way. But then when the demonstration subsided, it became the nuclear file, which is a shift that, Trump was not talking about the nuclear file for a number of months now. But when this took place, and we can go into details about why the attack that was expected to be imminent didn't take place, and then more and more American military equipment is moving to the region and so on. But I think one of the key points is that the credibility of both sides, the United States and Iran, is now extremely high because of what happened last time. So President Trump had the military attack, but also on the other hand, Iran responded with an attack on the US military base in nowhere else but Qatar, a country that has very good relations with Iran. And we can discuss this in detail as well. A few words about Lebanon. Of course, like Gaza, we can't say that there is a ceasefire in Lebanon because there are attacks every single day, and Israel has not been respecting the ceasefire agreement as well, because the ceasefire indicated that Israel should withdraw from all the Lebanese land. No, they still are having security posts and so on, a number of them. They were initially 5, and then 8 they increased, and the picture is not very clear. And of course, attacks every single day, and there is not enough use of the mechanism that was supposed to work, and by Israel reporting to a mechanism, and then they will see what can be done and so on. And this is not taking place. So we will also see how this situation will evolve, because it is, resulting in all kinds of embarrassment to the government of Lebanon. That is one of the most serious Lebanese governments that is seeking to see how they can deal with disarmament of Hamas. On Syria, of course, Syria is facing challenges that is extremely difficult on all kinds of levels, internally, regionally, and beyond that. And they have entered a transitional phase. The changes are real in tone and in structure, but the system remains highly managed and highly securitized. Of course, we're not saying that they're moving toward democracy, but there is a process of transformation that is quite calibrated, and we will see how this evolves, because, as we all know, this is a very tough situation for all the political forces there. But Syria remains politically fragmented and, of course, devastated economically. But on the other hand, as far as I'm concerned, Syria does not constitute any threat to Israel at this point. Yet Israel has been attacking Syria continuously for months now. It has been reduced a little bit, probably as a result of pressure from the US, but still, this is also an embarrassment to the regime that wanted to say that we are not intending to threaten any of our neighbors, and they said this 100 times. There is Sudan and Yemen. Maybe one word about Sudan, that there is a civil war, and the state of Sudan may further disintegrate or fragment or collapse, and this is a high risk, and this will have also huge regional repercussions, both in the Arab world, in Africa, in especially the Horn of Africa, and also may affect the Gulf as well. On Yemen, there is de facto partition between the north and the south, in a sense, and then there is an explosion in the south that resulted in huge tensions between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates that we can go into in our discussion. But at the same time, I have to admit that there has been a level of maturity in dealing with this issue, because in previous confrontations between countries, whether in the Gulf or in the Arab world in general, it was usually binary. It's either on or off. But now they are dealing with these issues in different compartments. We can have huge differences on one file, but work together on another file, and so on. So the Saudis and the Emiratis do not differ on how to deal with Iran, for example. They differ on Yemen, Sudan, and so on, but they don't differ on Iran. They don't differ on a number of other files, and so on. So we will see how this would work out. But I think the region is passing through a huge upheaval, and it will continue to be extremely tense. And we have to see how we can deal with this situation to reduce this level of volatility and instability for the good of the region and for the good of peace and security beyond the region. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Really, you did not disappoint. A really brilliant tour d'horizon based on your wealth of knowledge. There are so many elements that I want to dig into, and definitely want to come back to Iran and some of those dynamics as well. But Ksenia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, and thank you for having us today. As always, it's a pleasure and privilege to listen to Ambassador Youssef and his analysis, with which I largely agree. I will point out, though, some of the places where perhaps we have the different opinions, and I will try also to zoom in into Israel to outline the changes that took place during the last 2.5 years, and the regional perspective from Israel on the region and back from the region on Israel. So I will start, of course, with 10/7 and the unbelievable level of trauma that the Israeli society lived. And I think that anybody who tries to minimize it or disregard it or minimize the effect on what happened on 10/7, on everything that is happening now, is not doing justice to this situation. I believe that much of the military thinking, political thinking, but also the overwhelming feeling of the society that Israel must absolutely do everything that not to allow 10/7 again, not only in Gaza, but also in other places, completely changed the demeanor of the Israeli military and also other agencies such as Shin Bet and so on. And it also changed the political map in a way, pushing, of course, many Israelis to more right wing and extreme right wing directions. And I think that, again, Ambassador Youssef pointed out, the military activities today in Lebanon and Syria. I frankly do not think that the change of governance will change this kind of perspective of more aggressive approach to the region, not more trying to contain, as Netanyahu did for many years with Hamas and with Hezbollah. So this government specifically, because it refuses to take any responsibility internally for this horrific tragedy that could be avoided, and we know that very well, at the same time tries to exploit, this new situation that was created after the 10/7 in order to justify more aggressive approach on every possible front. Another, thing that needs to be said about these fronts is that the head of this government, Netanyahu, and the rest of his cabinet, they prefer to leave these fronts open. So, why we are seeing the military actions on almost every front that was open since 10/7, this is intentional, of course. This is not a mistake. This is not something that just happened because, well, there is another Hezbollah outpost or, another cell of Jamal Islamiyah, in Syria that was just discovered. This is also, of course, this is an attempt to deal with this reality on the ground. And during more than a year of the ceasefire in Lebanon, Hezbollah was not disarmed, although this was also, something that was stipulated in the ceasefire. But this is much more than that. This is, in fact, the government saying to, first of all, the Israeli citizens, listen, the war is not over. We know now that we cannot anymore, contain this, situation, these threats. And sometimes we will inflate these threats to the degree, that will justify, for example, staying at the Syrian territory in order to not to make this step back, not to release the territory that was once conquered, and so on. So this everything is intertwined in this ordeal. But I would like to first to say that there are two parts of that. This one part is the genuine feeling of, I think, every Israeli citizen that life cannot go on like it did before, prior to 10/7. The second part of it is the cynical political behavior of the current government that, again, as I said, refused to take responsibility for the 10/7 and also tries to exploit the situation in order to win the elections that are supposed to take place this year, whether they will be handed in June or October, November. These are the two dates. I'm leaning more to the November-October scenario because I do believe that Netanyahu, he learns very much every single poll, and he sees that the current government cannot be combined after these elections. So he prefers to wait, but we will have to wait and see, and there could be some surprises in regards to the budget that might not pass, due to the confrontations with the ultra-Orthodox and so on. And then, of course, that will bring us closer to the elections and so on. I will touch upon the elections and the complexity of having them at the time and the attempt of the government also to manipulate them later on. But I would like first to also, outline the unbelievable changes that happened, I think, from the Israeli point of view, in weakening the Iranian axis, the so-called axis of resistance, the axis of terror, Hamas, that was, of course, not fully degraded. They still exist, but militarily, of course, you cannot compare. Where Hamas is today vis-a-vis what we experienced by October 6th of 2023. The same is with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been critically weakened. And there is a question of right now that's being discussed in Israel, whether if in case of a war with Iran, if Iran will attack Israel, whether Hezbollah not willing to join, but able to join, this warfare. So the same goes for everything else. We see also the muted reaction of the Iraqi pro-Iranian militias during the war. And we saw that, in fact, the only party that was willing to step in for Hamas during these 2 years were the Houthis in Yemen, but everybody else suffered a very serious blow. In this reality of weakening the Iranian axis of evil, a new power is rising right now. And this is, of course, Syria. Syrian Sunni government that is, of course, very much aligned, with Turkey. And it remains to be seen with whom else in the Middle East. I think that is still being in works. But this is being assessed, this phenomenon is being assessed in Israel as a new threat, perhaps not the one that is equal to the Iranian one. But I'm talking right now about the Israeli government, yes, not about the Israeli people or the, Israeli experts, and we have different opinions in the expert community. As for the Israeli government take, the unification of Syria, the end of the civil war in Syria, and the creation right now of the government that is led by a person who once used to belong to Al-Qaeda ranks, and so on. This is a worrisome development, and this is something that the Israelis are following very, very closely. And of course, the far-reaching and long-term scenarios, could be very different in this region. We do not know yet what would be the effect of the new Syria, for example, on Jordan. We do not know if the new Syria will be fully aligned with Turkey, or perhaps, right now we see that it tries also to pave its own way and to work at the same time with Americans and with Russians and with Europeans and with all of their countries that are offering their help, first of all with Saudis, but also with others. So this is still, too early to tell, but I want to single it out as the most important, perhaps, development after, the 10/7 and 10/7 reality, after weakening critically Hezbollah and the other allies of Bashar Assad. His regime fell, and the new regime was created in Syria today, with all of the questions about communication between Israel and Syria and the intentions of both countries vis-a-vis each other. So the third development that I would like to also single out is an attempt to consolidate some of the regional powers in a very different way that we used to think of prior to 10/7. So if briefly, we singled out three axes: the Iranian axis, the Qatari Turkish axis that were closer to the Islamist circles and B circles and so on, and then the Saudi, Emirati, Moroccan, Bahraini, Egyptian, and Jordanian axis. So we see now an attempt to create something new. Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Pakistan. I don't like, so much the term of the Islamic NATO when NATO itself is not living its best times right now. So maybe something else, some, different, maybe Warsaw Pact, actually, I don't know, but not NATO. But in any case, this is something that, again, it came as an unexpected development to Israel. I think that, the rift between the Emiratis and the Saudis, although, it was not completely unseen. We saw, the competition and the rivalry and so on, but nobody expected for it to, blow away in such a matter. And nobody also knows right now, as Ambassador Youssef rightly said, how it will play out, or, when, that will change, because yes, all of these countries are hedging and trying to see what's best for them, right now, focusing on the today, more than perhaps long-term theories and so on. So in general, to sum it up, I would like to say that in these 2.5 years, Israel has been very in a very dire straits. It was humiliated military. It was dealing with a very serious blow to its national morale, to its understanding of what it is actually, and how it can deal with various threats. Then after that, it achieved amazing achievements on the battlefield, but was not able to translate any of them into political process. This is very important. The ceasefire, I still, believe that it can be regarded as ceasefire. Definitely, when we look at what happened exactly 1 year ago, at this time, and the amount of devastation and destruction and bloodshed. Of course, I'm aware of what is happening in Gaza today as well. But still, nevertheless, it allows, for people to breathe a little bit and to, have a little bit of the routine in their life. For Israel, it's definitely seen as a ceasefire because, the Israeli soldiers are not dying in Gaza these days. But this ceasefire was imposed. Let's not forget about it. It was not the choice of the Netanyahu government. And while, we are at that and all eyes are in Gaza, unfortunately, not all eyes are on the West Bank, where during these 2.5 years, I think very serious process took place. And some of them have to do with crippling annexation of the territories, of settler violence that is raging, and the flight of some of the communities there, and the total silence that we hear right now, also from the direction of the US, but also EU, but also many of the Arab countries actually. That are not vocal as they could be about it, and we are talking about also Israeli allies, this is something that again, it's interconnected with, of course, the blow of 10/7 and the combination of the extreme right-wing government that is in Israel today. The Israelis evaluate the situation as well, better. Perhaps in the sense of where are they? Better, of course, in comparison to 10/7, but not necessarily much better in comparison to what happened before that. There is still a sense of constant threat. And this is something that Netanyahu government benefits tremendously from. He built his career after, on, this feeling of there is some imminent threat. He was focusing on Iran. And today it's still Iran, despite the 12-day war in June. There is still a lot of uncertainty and a lot of concern about what the tomorrow will bring. And we are still as far away from a diplomatic solution with the Palestinians, but also, unfortunately, also with Syria and with Lebanon, as we were, more than a year ago before the ceasefire.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. Really, the perfect complement to Ambassador Youssef's overview, and I think critical to be reminded of the trauma on the ground. Of course, that Israelis are experiencing, Palestinians are experiencing, and many others in the region. I definitely want to come back to you on elections and a number of things, but both of you raised the issue of Iran. But I'm hoping maybe I'll turn to Ambassador Youssef, and we can talk about Iran maybe through the lens of these sort of shifting inter-Arab dynamics. Just given your area of expertise, and of course your experience in working, especially in the Arab League, in terms of engagements with Israel, with Turkey, with Iran, in particular. How do you see this developing? And especially as I think, and if I'm understanding correctly, I think, maybe one of the most significant changes in some ways over the last 2.5 years is the sort of I'm going to create a word here, but the re emergence in some ways, or the re-centralization, if you will, of the Israeli-Arab conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, really at the center. Is that a correct understanding of things, especially how we look at Iran and the dynamics that are about to, well, we hope not take shape, but that are taking shape slowly? Ambassador Youssef, please.
Well, I think the region recognizes that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is still the heart of the conflicts in the region. But there is a recognition that it is by far not the only one. And there are multiple conflicts that need to be dealt with, just like we need to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This wasn't the case a few decades ago. A few decades ago, the whole focus was on one issue and one issue only, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Sometimes we also talk about the Golan Heights. Sometimes we talk about Lebanon and Hezbollah, the 2006 war, and so on. But the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has a different and special situation in the region as a whole, and this applies to Israel as well. They can have normalization with Bahrain, normalization with the United Arab Emirates. This would not, substitute for the necessity in order to deal with the situation on the Israeli-Palestinian front. Now, the question of Iran is now taking a totally different magnitude. Because, as I mentioned, last time Qatar was attacked. Now, what the Iranians are saying now is that this would be a regional war. The question is, do you believe them, yes or no? And if you do believe them, what do you do? And then when the demands are maximalist demands that everybody knows cannot be fulfilled, then we're putting ourselves in a corner. So, and this applies not only to the situation in Iran, this applies to the attitude towards conflicts in the region. So, what the Israelis are asking, and to a certain extent supported by the US, is reflective of a tweet that President Trump did during the attacks on Iran in the first time around. He said total surrender. For us in the region, we know this will never happen. And this is the hope, the demand, what Israel wants to achieve with the Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iran, and anybody that they feel is bothering them. And this will not happen. Ksenia said two things. One of them is that they are weak. Yes. Okay. Some of the axis of resistance became weak. Isn't this the time to reach an agreement? And there has been precedence. So even with the situation between Israel and Lebanon, it was possible to reach a maritime deal. And I think this was historic. So this can be repeated. And I know from American mediators at the time that they also resolved a number of issues in relation to the land border. This should continue. And with Syria, we had direct talks and negotiations between the Syrians and the Israelis. And we are belittling these things, and they were ready to see how to revise the 1974 armistice agreement. These are not small things. So there are possibilities. But then I also differ with something that Ksenia said about the impression that this ceasefire was imposed on Israel. I totally differ with that. It wasn't. This ceasefire is 10 times better than the ceasefire that Israel was pressured to accept, which was the first one. The first one did not mention disarmament of Hamas at all, and it was a ceasefire that President Trump accepted that Israel returns to war without a justification. But there was no mention at all of a disarmament. And it was total withdrawal from Gaza. And so on. And Israel, of course, is interpreting the ceasefire agreement in the way it wishes. So the Rafah crossing was supposed to open from day one. It didn't. And he put a condition that is not in the agreement, that the ceasefire, the Rafah crossing will not be opened until all the hostages are returned, which has nothing to do with anything in the ceasefire agreement. And this time around, after finishing this phase, which while the ceasefire agreement does not have phases, but now he's saying there is no reconstruction before disarmament of Hamas. And also in Lebanon, he's saying we will not take any steps until we have disarmament of Hezbollah, as if the disarmament of Hamas and Hezbollah will take 2 weeks. No. So this is also a recipe for continued conflict if we are to have all these demands requested to be met in order for us to make progress on other issues.
Well, thank you so much, Ambassador. And Ksenia, I want to give you a chance to respond, of course, to that directly, but also maybe to talk about, to start with Iran, and maybe the view of a perspective from Israel. Of course, we remember that the first sort of wave, the first attack included a pretty significant defense by the international community, including many Arab states, Of course, that as the war continued, as things developed, that sort of I wouldn't say disintegrated, but it weakened to a certain degree. What is the sense of what things might look like if there is a further escalation in the current context from Israel?
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, so very briefly on the ceasefire. Again, I will respectfully argue that Trump did impose the ceasefire on Netanyahu, who internally wanted to continue with this war. And just in September, so about a month before the ceasefire, he pushed the chief of staff to enter with the military force the central camps like Deir al-Balach and so on. And what he was referring to internally, again, in every single statement, he always said that we will not stop fighting unless Hamas will be demilitarized. Hamas was not demilitarized, and we don't know when it will happen. So again, without arguing about the nature of the ceasefire, that of course, perhaps you can read into it as as a better ceasefire, again for this specific government, because it also did not impose on them to deal with the Palestinian Authority as they were supposed to, according to the previous drafts and so on. Again, some of us think that it's actually a bad thing, yes, but for Netanyahu it was definitely a win. But in any case, he would prefer to continue with the warfare until this day. And therefore, in Israel, the feeling of ecstasy, perhaps, at this day, of the ceasefire, was due to this understanding that we could easily, if not for this pressure from the White House, continue to be, engaged in the everyday war with hundreds of thousands of reservists and soldiers in Gaza Strip, and without any political goal attached to this war. Okay, so in this sense, it was imposed on them. In regards to your question, Jonathan, of course, there is anxiety in Israel about what might happen, and I can tell you that because of the ambiguity and because of the statements of American president and his aides and some of the Israeli politicians, many people are actually spending their nights in the safe spaces because they don't know when the war will begin. This hang situation is something that is very difficult to deal with. But first of all, I have to tell you that the military and political establishment is convinced that there will be a war, that there is no opportunity, there is no possibility to reach any kind of agreement with the Iranian regime. When it will happen, so the hope that is unspoken, this is not something that is being discussed publicly, that the Arab states that currently today, they abstain, and they tell frankly to Trump that we will not let you to use our airspace, we will not let you use our bases, but in case they will be attacked by Iran, in case their territory will be attacked, they will join the war nevertheless. And then this coalition that, again, if I'm trying to look back at 35 years ago at war in the Gulf, well, George Bush Sr. had 35 countries with him in his coalition. How many countries does Donald Trump has now? It's basically one, yes, which is Israel. There is a big question mark about all others. But I think that there is this anticipation that the dynamics of the war and the developments that will take place will basically force some of the regional powers, if not all, to join the anti-Iranian coalition. Yes, whether quietly or officially, and this is also something that we heard from the leaders of the Arab states that also warned Iran that they're trying to prevent the war, but if Iranians also will not be ready to compromise, and again, personally for me, it's very difficult to see Iranians compromising on the ballistic missile project, for example. Yes, so this is something I don't know, because I'm not, of course, aware of any military secrets or negotiation secrets and so on. So I don't know if it's really on the table as Netanyahu demanded. Yes, for now, it seems he had to have a cold shoulder in the White House, but we actually don't know, whether it's something that is being discussed. But again, knowing well the Iranian positions, it's really hard for me to believe that they will just say, well, yes, after the 12-day war, after these years of confrontation, we will just let go and, we will close this project and the nuclear project and we'll just give up. And yeah, because, it's probably, for the Iranian regime, it's perhaps, when they're looking at the dangers and the escalations and possible scenarios, giving up on the staples of their political ideology is maybe more difficult than even to embrace the idea of all-out war. So this is again, this is a very gloomy kind of perception of from Israel. There is a lot of concern about what will actually happen, because we saw that Iranians are able to cause harm, and actually serious harm, to Israel. Again, there is also a question of the responsibility of the politicians, Israeli politicians, that were very happy to take credit for the big victory after this 12-day war, and basically promised to the Israeli nation that, the nuclear capabilities are destroyed, and also the ballistic missiles, are harmed to unrecognition. And it seems that only after 7 months, 8 months, we are posed again, with this same kind of threat. So there is a lot of uproar also about that. But, at the current time, the hegemon, which is the government, of course, they set the discourse. And it's very clearly seen also on the mainstream television and newspapers and so on. So little criticism about that.
No, yeah, of course. And then add to that, of course, implications of the internal strife in Iran on regime decision making, and it creates a very worrying picture. I think we can all agree on that. Maybe I'll then just shift. It's related actually, but I wanted to talk about normalization and normalization specifically in the context of this Saudi shift certainly since October 7th, but even more recently as the war had continued, into its second year and beyond, and then what that means for a sort of whether it's a shift in Saudi foreign policy or whether it's something, going maybe reverting to this idea and then bringing in again the relevance of the Arab Peace Initiative, and trying to sort of reset that approach, which of course has a sort of order of operations that, normalization comes after a political arrangement with the Palestinians, not necessarily before. But I would love both of your reactions because I know both of you are engaged in different ways on this file. But maybe I'll start with Ambassador Youssef and we'll go to Ksenia.
Well, I don't think that this issue is on the table anymore as long as there is this coalition in Israel. It's very simple. I just returned from Saudi Arabia this morning for a few days. We discussed every possible file you can think of. Normalization was not discussed at all because they think that now this is not a subject that they're willing to talk about because there is nothing that can be done. And also the attitude of the Israeli coalition is an attitude that, as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, cannot be tolerated. When Netanyahu jokes that a Palestinian state can be established in Saudi Arabia, you can't joke about these things. And then when you have also ministers in the coalition insulting Saudi Arabia and so on, and when you have Netanyahu saying, I am establishing a new Middle East on his own, and you want Saudi Arabia to take some of these issues just lightly and, okay, let's normalize and everything would be fine. No, it will not happen. So the issue of normalization requires all kinds of steps. And it was MBS in an interview with Fox News that initially was the one who raised this issue in response to a question and said that there is progress that is being achieved every day. This was at a time when they felt that some progress may be possible. But now that they know that progress is not possible on even very small issues, like having the PA participate in having, the day after in the current situation, in having a reasonable attitude towards Rafah, in seeing what's happening from settlers in the West Bank, in seeing, annexation that Ksenia and settlements that Ksenia is talking about. Every single day, there are attacks on Palestinians by settlers and so on, and nothing is taking place. So in this environment, do you think Saudi Arabia would be willing to say, okay, we are willing to ignore all these things and we will be ready to take steps towards accommodating steps towards Israel? So sadly, I don't think that this is the case. And also the question that was mentioned by Ksenia before, that Israel wants to leave all the fronts open. And this is for election purposes and not because there is a genuine need for these fronts to be open. This is not acceptable, but not only to Saudi Arabia. This is not acceptable to Saudi Arabia, to Jordan, to Egypt, to all kinds of countries, and not only in the region, but also beyond the region. In my wildest dreams, I wouldn't have expected demonstrations against Israel from Seattle to Sydney, in all corners of the world. So Israel has to get the message as well that what they are doing is unacceptable and does not augur well for stability and security in the region, including for Israel.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And Ksenia, I want to give you the floor on this because I know that you're, of course, still involved in a lot of these efforts at all levels, really, on the normalization. So it'd be great to hear from you. But also, if you wanted to maybe, you mentioned also the West Bank as Ambassador also mentioned, and I think it's important to recall that in some ways the normalization, the Abraham Accords at least came about. At least we're told, right, that this was the quid pro quo, right, the idea of normalization in exchange for shelving, at least temporarily or permanently or what have you, this idea of Israeli annexation. But as we see quite clearly, there's an agenda moving ahead. Even beyond Saudi Arabia, I'd love your thoughts on the UAE in particular and their positioning given these dynamics, given this, sort of newfound rivalry, which is probably more related to Yemen than necessarily normalization, but with Saudi Arabia in particular. And then, and sorry to do this to you, but then if you would, I think it's a logical place. Maybe you could just proceed and give us an understanding of the internal situation in Israel as well, and in particular what you mentioned. You gave us a bit of a preview on the upcoming elections, and I think the first question that I have on the elections is: does this issue of normalization of Israel's diplomatic isolation globally feature in the domestic conversation? So sorry, that's a lot for you, Ksenia, but
Oh,
please.
yeah. Well, I'll try to deal with the burden. I will just start by saying that I'm leading a civil society initiative, and we are bringing together young leaders from across the Middle East, Israelis and Egyptians and Moroccans and Saudis and Emiratis, and of course Palestinians. They are always in the room. They are represented by at least a third Israelis, third Palestinians, and third from the whole MENA, because we do believe that there is a real case for normalization and for real peace between our countries. But it doesn't mean that we can do it without first making peace with our closest neighbors. This is ridiculous to think that we can just like jump over and somehow the core of this conflict and just disregard it and say, well, when we will do peace with everybody, they will come as well. That was what Netanyahu tried to preach all of these years. Well, it doesn't happen this way. You really have to work hard on this issue, to sit down with people who right now currently he's describing the president of Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, as terrorist. Well, he's terrorist. Then there is nobody that he could be able to sit with, and the reason is that he doesn't want to, for political reasons. This is not because he cannot, because he just is not interested. I was always, I belong to the camp of those who were more skeptical about the chances of real progress with Saudi Arabia, also before 10/7. You can look down and Google my articles about that, because I wrote that, this government is incapable for even minimal gestures of goodwill vis-a-vis the Palestinians. It's just incapable. It's not realistic. They will not do anything. And the Saudis, who aspired, to be, the leaders of their world, and certainly with all of the, importance of, their place and the Islamic faith and so on, they will not give up. They will not say that, well, this is fine, whatever happens, we'll just have to go with the normalization. So I didn't think that we were very close also back then on 10/7. And of course, since then, I have to tell you that it's unbelievable things happen, Jonathan, so I will just mention that in the first weeks of the war, when we saw, the demonstrations, they started, Ambassador, against Israel on the very first day when we were still looking for our dead. Before, any kind of incursion to Gaza began, there were already anti-Israeli demonstrations. I don't think that they were necessarily attached to what Israel was doing, because it happened when Israel was just attacked. At that same time, we saw the Saudi channels basically going against Hamas, and they were grilling Hamas leaders in the live interviews and so on, and they were asking them hard questions. Why did you start this war? Who gave you the mandate to start this war? Why did you start this war if you knew that you are unable to protect your people? Why didn't you, if you prepared so well to this war? Where are the shelters for the women and the children, and the innocent civilians and all of that? And I translated many of these texts to Hebrew because I thought that it is important to know that, there are partners in this region and we can talk to them and we can make progress with them. But we cannot do it, when we say, well, listen, we are interested just, in this direct flights to Riyadh, but we are not interested to meet the people who are living 15 minutes from our houses in Ramallah, in Nablus, in Gaza, and so on. So this is, I think that we should not expect, definitely with this government, but also any new government. They should also know that, if they will continue with the same course, they will not be able to fulfill this promise that could, really turn our life in a good way, to elevate our economies, to provide, jobs. And this is not only for us, but also for the Palestinians. We see a lot of, in our organization, we explore always, these places where we can do stuff together, promote them together, create, outlets for, joint thinking, joint work, and so on. And there are many of those. And, integration in the region will help both Israelis and the Palestinians, but not if you just are focused on this, theory that proved completely wrong, that you can achieve normalization with all of the Arab world without the Palestinians. So that, that's on that. And again, I'll just have to remind everybody, we have to achieve a solution for conflict, not for the sake of just making peace with Saudi Arabia. We have to do that for our sakes, for our own future, for our children, for ourselves, because no peace is actually possible without first tending to this issue. Now about the domestic attitude towards that. Well, I have to tell you that after 10/7 again, we are looking inside and maybe more on our immediate borders in quest for security. This is the bread and butter of all of the Israeli politicians: security, security, security. The question is how you achieve security. For now, I see little political actors. There are, of course, the Yair Golan of Democrats is definitely doing that, and in this smaller way, maybe Yair Lapid. They are addressing the issue of importance of having good, normal relations with all of the actors in the region, in the world. The diplomatic isolation, of course, that is growing. And we see what happens not only in the Arab world, I mean, Europe. Look at, countries in Europe that are basically cutting relations with Israel today. This is, not a joke anymore. This is very serious. We look at the discussions in the EU on the association agreement that we can be just cut off out of it, if things will deteriorate. Nevertheless, I do not think that this is the primary driver of any political party right now, or the focus of these elections. Sadly, still, the focus of these elections, and this is how Benjamin Netanyahu tries to frame it, it's either the Jewish protector's government, he means his government, any kind of government that he will create, or the government of the Muslim Brotherhood. He is referring, of course, to the party of Mansour Abbas, Ram, and the possibility that it will join the coalition. Because right now, what we see in every single poll for the last, year and a half at least, or something like this, is that the party that will eventually decide who gets to combine the government, it's their parties, it's the Arab vote. And therefore, I think, and I'm afraid that there will be an attempt to depress the vote in the Arab sector. And of course, the attempt to vilify the Arab parties. First of all, Mansour Abbas, because there is less probability that others will join any kind of government in Israel. It's already in full power, and we see fake news, and we see AI in full action, and so on. So these elections that are critical elections for regional integration, for Israeli security, for domestic reasons, for international reasons, there will be a real fight, a real war. And the oppositions better be ready for that.
Thank you so much. That was really very rich and very helpful in helping us understand this dynamic. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to just invite the audience to submit questions in the Q&A function as that begins to populate. I still have a few left, so we'll go from there. But Ambassador Youssef, feel free to respond to any of that. But also, I wanted to talk about another election that we're expecting in the region, which is, of course, at least the expectation is in Lebanon, and you briefly touched on the situation in Lebanon, and regarding Hezbollah and regarding what we saw as an incredibly, I think we would agree, positive approach of the current government, of the current leadership in this very difficult discussion, as you mentioned, about disarmament that doesn't take just a few weeks or even a few months. It's a long internal process with regard to Hezbollah and Hezbollah's role in the country. But how do you see that shaping up and potentially in its relationship with Iran, with Syria, with all of these dynamics? Because of course, while of course like Israeli elections or Lebanese elections, they might be very focused on the internal dynamics happening in a particular country. But of course, they have implications that are far wider. Please, Ambassador.
Well, in order to empower the current government, they have to be able to prove to the people that they have achieved progress, and progress on a number of fronts. One of them is in relation to the economic situation inside Lebanon. They have a huge financial crisis. They have all kinds of problems regarding corruption and bad governance and so on. And they're working on that. Another one is in relation to disarmament of Hezbollah. And the majority in Lebanon would want to see this happen. But also they want to see it happen in a manner that would be respectful. Now, what is happening now, according to some of my Lebanese friends, is that they're saying to the government, now you are focusing on disarming Hamas, where you're being attacked every single day, and you're not doing anything about it. And you're not forceful enough to prevent that. So yes, we want Hamas to be disarmed and to have one law, one gun, and etc. But we also want to ensure that Israel will not be attacking us every day. But then Israel, on the other hand, wants freedom of action because of its own election. You can't square this circle. And then you have the United States, that was the mediator in relation to this issue, not doing anything about it. And this applies also to Gaza, as I mentioned. So if this continues, this would not result in enhancing the role of those who are moving in a direction that is supportive of what the region wants to see and what the majority of the Lebanese want to see. So this is why we do have a problem with the attitude of this coalition that is focusing on nothing but moving to the right, keeping all these files open, as Ksenia said, in order to see how they can get better votes, because Israel is moving to the right, as Ksenia mentioned as well. And this is the way in order to achieve their objectives, regardless of the objectives of anybody else. So we will see how this plays out. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that we are moving in a direction that would make things easier for the Lebanese people, but it will make things much more complicated.
Oh, thank you. And then, of course, we've had this. I think we've established, and again, I appreciate Ambassador Youssef's caution on my fast and loose use of the term unprecedented when talking about these things. But certainly, we have an unparalleled, I think we can agree, role for the United States. Of course, the United States, certainly since Camp David in the 70s, has been playing a central role in the Middle East. But we have something new. So I think unparalleled is probably the correct term. But in addition to that, and I think that we've established that, and that in some ways we're waiting, including next week, in terms of what finances might come for this Gaza reconstruction plan, and what it might look like, even et cetera. So while in many ways all eyes on Gaza, but all eyes on Washington as well. Ksenia, I think in particular, we're also, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to ask you about Russia and about Russia's role, because of course I would say, at least from my perspective, and you tell me if I'm correct, that one of the more significant changes is certainly with the fall of the Assad regime and the change in government in Syria has been at least the feeling of Russia's disappearance from the region. Is that a correct understanding of the situation?
Well, I don't think that Russia, frankly, is going anywhere. First of all, it was very pragmatic from the very beginning. It did not defend its ally and client Bashar Assad when it understood that it's useless and he's about to fall. This was the assessment, and therefore they were the first country to make contact with the new rulers of Damascus, even though they still regard them as officially as terrorists, and this organization they regard it as Jabhat al-Nusra and the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham that they created after. They still regard it as a terrorist organization. The Russian bases are still intact in Syria, and moreover, I think that also Ahmed al-Shara is engaged in hedging all across the region, and given the very significant influence of Turkey, it's just natural for him to look for perhaps some checks and balances, and one of the balances could be Russia. I think that that's what they're trying to achieve, and therefore we are seeing time after time visits of both al-Shara and Shaibani, his Minister of Foreign Affairs, to Moscow, in the pace that I think that they met with them much more than with any of the European leaders so far. So there is a question of supply of wheat, of course, and there is this question of the future of Bashar Assad, who is in Moscow, and there is of course the question of weapons, because Syria would need weapons. It will not necessarily receive the weapons that it needs from either US or EU. Therefore, Russia, maybe not currently, because now it's too engaged in this cruel war against Ukraine, but at some point, and the bases are crucial for the Russians to keep, the hub, Syria as hub for their African activity, because they're very active in the Sahel, and this engagement actually is just growing. The same goes for Sudan, so we do not hear about it much, but the Russian forces, are there, and it's also in Libya and also in other less discussed, parts of the world. I think that we have to look very closely. For right now, currently, Russia is definitely weakened, and it's too entangled in the war that it started by itself with Ukraine. It doesn't mean, however, that it's leaving the Middle East, and it's always happy to get in the middle of, some bloody civil war, some confrontation, and to get what it needs, from specific country.
No, thank you. And it's a good reminder that there's no such thing as the status quo when as a status quo rather when talking about
I
this
just
region.
want to remind you that the head of Shin Bet in Israel almost 4 years ago, during the last elections, warned specifically of the Russian interference in the elections and Russian foreign influence in media and so on. So there is also this aspect, and it doesn't apply, of course, only to Israel, but also to many other Middle Eastern countries.
Fascinating. Something I would love to unpack with you maybe at a future webinar, maybe dedicated to the subject, but really, really interesting. So we'll just go to the audience here. There are a couple of questions already, and I'll just read. What are the chances that Israeli society will elect, either now or in the future, a government interested in making peace with the people of Palestine? Maybe we'll start with Ksenia.
I'll be happy to take that. Well, Israeli people did choose in the past leaders that opted for peace with Palestinians, such as Yitzhak Rabin, for example. And also another prime minister who actually came from the right-wing ranks, Ehud Olmert, but who also was engaged in very real and sincere negotiations with Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, for a few years. So that can happen again. Nevertheless, I will have to point out that I do not foresee in the current elections, for sure not, but also, for maybe some years, governments that would be more leaning, to the peace camp. But I do believe that any other government, but Netanyahu's government, will be more pragmatic and for the sake of, its own interests even, it, will act very differently. For example, in relations with the Palestinian Authority, we did see a profound change between what happened during the government of change that was led by Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, and what happened after with Netanyahu. So steps of goodwill are possible. Stabilization, most importantly, stabilization of the situation is possible. I do not see, however, any composition of the government, any time soon, that would be willing to engage again in negotiations, that would lead eventually to, withdrawal from part of West Bank, all of West Bank, and this is, I don't think that it's in the cards for the time being.
Thank you. Ambassador, did you want to talk from?
Well, I want to refer to something that you said, Jonathan, about reconstruction, because I think this is a key.
Yeah.
And the Board of Peace will be meeting on the 19th of February. And I think this is a key issue. And my expectation is that Netanyahu will not allow any reconstruction to take place, because reconstruction means hope to the people. And Netanyahu is not willing to give the people of Gaza and the people of Palestine any hope, because I think the objective of Netanyahu and his coalition remains the same. He wants to have mass displacement of the people, and he wants to liquidate the Palestinian question, and his way is through mass displacement. And this is why, just like he was obstructive in relation to the first phase, waiting for the last body. Yes, it is important, but he didn't even care about the hostages when they were alive. So, and this was in statements by his coalition saying that there are things that are much more important, including disarming Hamas and so on. So, sadly, my expectation that is Israel will not allow reconstruction, and this will be a point of contention between Israel and the large number of countries in the region and possibly beyond.
Yeah, and well, I mean, certainly, it seems as if, and again, we'll see how things develop next week. But it seems that everybody's waiting for the Trump administration to lose interest in this and then sort of move on to the next thing. So far, that hasn't necessarily happened. Again, whether or not they'll have that staying power to continue and the ability to actually change something on the ground, I think are two different things in some ways. But still, we see. At least the interest, I believe, unless you think otherwise. But please, Ambassador.
You see, Jonathan, uh, Trump wanted to own Gaza. Now he owns the peace board, and he has the ultimate decision-making process in according to the system that he devised. So the success would be his, but the failure also will be his. So I think if he wants to succeed, then much more effort needs to be done in order for the situation to improve. And this is very small, and the indicators are very clear as to whether things would improve or not. When this is very clear in relation to humanitarian assistance, early recovery, and reconstruction, and the next few weeks will become clear for all of us and for the rest of the world whether this has improved or it didn't.
Absolutely. No, and I think on that we all agree there's a long road ahead, certainly with regard to Gaza. But one other question on the chat, and I'll just read it. It's a question to Ksenia. It's you said that there cannot be normalization without the Palestinians. The normalization with several Muslim countries that held even after the current war and serious progress toward normalizations with Saudi Arabia prior to 10/7 suggest otherwise. And with the failure of Palestinian leadership to accept offers that would give them 97% of the West Bank, suggests that Netanyahu and Kushner's strategy of bypassing the Israeli conflict may be a viable option once this conflict settles. I think there should have been a question mark perhaps at the end of that comment, but still. But nevertheless, I think we understand the point. So maybe if you just wanted to respond quickly before we wrap up. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I specifically refer to the Saudi Arabia, and I stand by my words. I do not see them, agreeing to any kind of formal normalization, because otherwise we do have relations, as you know. Yes, we have trade, we have Israeli experts working as we speak right now in the city of Neom, and so on. So these things are happening, but formal normalization will happen only, if there will be a clear political horizon for the Palestinians. Okay, so this is something that was said more than I don't know how many times, numerous times by all of the Saudi leaders on different levels. And again, we heard it before 10/7 and with more power now after 10/7. But I also have to remind you that every agreement that we signed with any Arab country for now, was interconnected with the Palestinian issue. And when President Anwar Sadat, the great President Anwar Sadat, came to visit Israel and spoke in the Knesset, he said, I'm not interested in the bilateral peace. I'm here for the Salam al-Shamil, for the encompassing peace. Okay, so it was clearly also written in the Camp David Accords. The Palestinian autonomy was supposed to be created. But the Menachem Begin government, of course, stalled, and it didn't come into power, and it affected very negatively our relations with Egypt. This and also some of the other developments, such as the war in Lebanon and so on. We clearly see the impact of that on the relations. They're very strained. We have the benefit of the military relations, but on the civil society, trade, and so on, it's it's much less than we would achieve. The historic peace with Jordan took place only after the conclusion of Oslo agreements, and also even for the Abraham Accords. So the Emiratis were, it suggested basically to sign the agreement, in return for the promise of Israel not to annex the West Bank. So again, clear connection to the Palestinians. And if you ask, any of the Emirati, leaders, officials, and so on, they will tell you the same. So yes, we are interested in relations with Israel. Yes, we have long-term, interest, and we are not going away. But it doesn't mean that we are not interested in the solution of the Palestinian issue. Now, Saudi Arabia, yes, its situation is different because, again, it tries to pose itself as the leader of the Arab world. And as such, it has more responsibility and more burden on it, than any other country currently. So, yes, I think that that's the point.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Ksenia. And I think maybe invoking the legacy of Anwar Sadat is probably an appropriate place, maybe to end this discussion. And I think that we've had so many areas of agreement. I think many areas of disagreement. But again, my profound thanks to both of you for helping us to understand the situation on the ground, differences of opinion that exist, and really to, in some ways, just scratch the surface. But I think we're all a little bit more understanding of the reality on the ground than we were before this started. So once again, and on behalf of the Center and Georgetown School of Foreign Service, thank you, Ksenia and Ambassador Youssef, for your time and for your engagement. And I hope we can continue this relationship in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.